On April 21, 1509, Henry VII died at Richmond Palace. Within 3 days, his 17-year-old son had the two most hated men in England arrested and thrown into the Tower. The popular story says the old king was so obsessively cheap that he literally wasted away, hunched over his gold, forgetting to eat while he counted every last coin. It's a perfect image. It's also wrong. The real story of Henry VII and money is far more disturbing than simple greed. Here's the version that's been circulating for 5 centuries. Henry VII was a notorious miser. He personally counted his treasury. He hoarded gold while his court decayed around him. He pinched pennies so obsessively that his own health collapsed, and he essentially starved himself to death in a room full of wealth. The story gets repeated in listicles, Reddit threads, and history memes. It paints him as a kind of tragic cartoon. Scrooge McDuck with a crown, and the reputation isn't entirely made up. Francis Bacon, writing his history of Henry's reign in 1622, more than a century after the king's death, described a ruler whose careful thrift curdled into avarice as he aged, and treated that greed as the flaw that darkened everything else he achieved. Polydore Virgil, an Italian scholar who was actually at Henry's court, wrote that all the king's virtues were obscured in his later years by avarice, a bad vice in a private man, he said, and the worst possible vice in a monarch. Even the king's own subjects seemed unmoved by his passing. Within days of the death, the Spanish ambassador in London reported that the people were very happy and that few tears were being shed for Henry VII. So the reputation has deep roots, but the specific claim that he starved himself to death counting gold has no contemporary source behind it. No court record, no chronicle, no letter describes anything like that scene. It's a legend that grew up long after the fact. So what actually happened? Here's what we do have, and it's arguably more unsettling than the myth. Henry VII's household and chamber accounts survive, and when you look at them, you find something remarkable. The king's own initials, marked in the margins, entry after entry, page after page. Payments of a few shillings, minor household expenses. He wasn't glancing at summaries. He was auditing his kingdom line by line. But this wasn't the behavior of a man who loved gold for its own sake. Historian Thomas Penn, in his book Winter King, argues that Henry used money as a weapon. The key instrument was something called a bond or recognizance, a financial penalty hanging over someone's head. If you were a nobleman who displeased the crown, or even one who might displease it someday, you could be forced to sign a bond promising enormous sums, step out of line, and the debt would be called in. Historians who have counted the cases find that of the 62 noble families alive during Henry's reign, 36 were tied to the crown by bonds or recognizances. And once you add in heavy fines and attainders, only about a quarter of the peerage was left untouched. They weren't just taxed, they were trapped. Great swathes of the English nobility owed the king money that could be collected at a moment's notice. It was a system of political control disguised as bookkeeping. The men who ran this system were Edmund Dudley and Sir Richard Empson. They were so despised that the new king had them arrested within days of his father's death, tried on what historians generally regard as a trumped-up treason charge, and beheaded on Tower Hill in August 1510, a killing that had less to do with any real crime than with how enormously popular it was. Dudley himself, sitting in the Tower awaiting his fate, drew up a petition listing scores of people he believed the old king's financial methods had treated unjustly. And he was clear that the policy had been Henry's own. It reads like a confession, except the guilt belonged to a dead monarch. So if Henry didn't starve himself counting gold, what did kill him? The evidence points to tuberculosis, which is what most historians now think was wearing him down, though no autopsy or firm diagnosis exists. In his final years, Henry's health deteriorated sharply. He grew thin, suffered recurring illness, and spent long stretches shut away in his privy chamber at Richmond, partly, it seems, to hide how weak he had become, for fear a rival claimant might move against him and his heir. His sight was said to be failing. He struggled to eat, not because he was too busy counting coins, but because he was dying of a wasting disease. He was 52 years old, and here's where the myth gets its foothold. a sick, aging king already famous for his obsession with money, wasting away in a palace full of treasure. It's not hard to see how that image sharpens over the centuries into a story about a man who literally starved himself over his gold. The truth was sadder and more ordinary. He was a dying man who happened to be very, very good at making enemies through finance. What makes his story genuinely extraordinary isn't how he died. It's what he built. Henry VII took a financially exhausted, war-torn kingdom and made the English crown solvent, feared and rich. He did it through obsessive financial control, intelligence, paranoia, and a willingness to treat his own nobles as debtors rather than partners. His son, Henry VIII, inherited a full treasury, and one of his first acts was to cancel fines and disown his father's enforcers before spending the inheritance on wars, palaces, and a court on a scale his father never allowed himself. The miser's gold didn't last a generation. There's something in us that wants to believe a miser will be punished by his own greed, that the story will wrap up neatly, the villain dying alone among his coins. But real history rarely offers that kind of moral symmetry. Henry VII wasn't destroyed by his love of money, he was destroyed by his own body. The money outlived him, briefly, and then it was gone too. If stories like this one change how you see the past, stick around. There's always another king, another myth, and another version of the truth worth digging into.